London and Paris were both very early adopters of the metro. In fact, it's called a metro because of those two cities. But one thing where Paris absolutely wipes the floor with London is express metros and suburban rail. The RER is my favorite transit system anywhere in the world, and while Paris has 5 cross-city railways, London only has 2. One of which is really slow. What London does have though are a couple pieces of interesting metro infrastructure that do kinda give the vibes of an RER or S train, but aren't quite ready for that in reality. First, there's the Victoria Line, a really fast and automated metro line with wide stop spacing and deliberately designed to connect places that were already strongly connected. There's a reason why so many of the fastest train journeys across London involve the Victoria Line. But it has a problem. It's a little too small, not only in terms of the trains themselves, but also how far outside of central London it goes. There's also the subsurface underground lines, which are distinguished by having wider trains than the deep level tube lines, and mostly running, closer to the surface. The tracks also connect and form a nice circle around the city, which immediately gets me thinking of the Berlin ringbahn. However, there are some complications that prevent the subsurface network in London from operating as efficiently as the German capital's very own circle line with far-reaching suburban tails. So let's take these two pieces of infrastructure and come up with an alternate history for them. What if they had been built, or indeed modified, in the same spirit as a European S train? What if London had Elizabeth lines before the Elizabeth line was even a thing? Well, that is what my entry to Classy Wales' latest video contest is all about. So mind the gap, climb aboard, and let's get crayoning. We start with the Victoria Line. This is the newest tube line in London, in terms of having 100% new infrastructure at the time of its opening. The Jubilee line is newer, but it uses some stations that formerly belonged to the Bakerloo. Despite being totally new, the Victoria line was still built to the same standards as the other deep lines, perhaps to allow interoperable trains. But this presents a capacity challenge. Victoria line trains may be 8 cars long, but they can get super cramped, not least because they see plenty of short trips and people getting on and off everywhere. There's no denying that it's a super useful line, especially with its cross-platform transfers, but I get the feeling sometimes that it's the wrong solution to the right problem, or that it's not being used to its full potential. Traveling through London quickly isn't just something that people in the city would want to do. You may have trips that start way out north and end way down south, or the other way around. For that reason, it's useful to consider through running onto the existing network of suburban railways in London. As you probably know, these railways all terminate on the edge of the city because historically they weren't allowed to go through it. That's why London has so many major termini, though the one relevant for this video isn't really one that comes to mind. I'm talking about Moorgate and the Northern City Line. This is a main line that currently has service from Great Northern, but was once a part of the tube itself on, you guessed it, the Northern Line. Some early Victoria Line proposals had the line branch onto the NCL, but it still would have terminated at Moorgate without running through the city from there. Moorgate is very close to Liverpool Street, the number 1 busiest station in the UK in the most recent data, and as of 2022 you can now walk between them using the Elizabeth Line platform that spans both stations. For what it's worth, Moorgate was only the 36th most used station in London. Both stations are right in the heart of London's original financial centre and are dotted with high-rises around Finsbury Circus. That said, service on the NCL today runs quite infrequently on London standards. And despite the Moorgate-Liverpool Street complex having quite a lot of connections, it is still a connection that you'd have to make if you want to get closer to other parts of the city. And this right here is the main thought behind my alternate history. What if instead of the Victoria Line simply running onto the Northern City Line, it had a city centre tunnel attached to that line, to form what would be London's first true S-Bahn or RER line? Let's take a look at what that might have looked like. First, Moorgate would keep its current terminating platforms that would be used for peak hour services like the Elizabeth Line does today at Paddington, but also get new underground through platforms that most ordinary services would use. After Moorgate, the next stop would be at Ludgate Hill. This would be close to the present-day City Thameslink, where you can connect to Thameslink. After that is New Aldwych, and if you're wondering what the old Aldwych is, that's a former Piccadilly line station that branched off the line. Then it's Tottenham Court Road, Oxford Circus, and after that, the present-day Victoria Line all the way down to Brixton. And there would also be some fast peak hour services that start at the mainline platforms at Victoria, then run non-stop to Brixton. That would replace what is currently a southeastern service, which has a great view of Battersea Power Station. After Brixton, you would get on existing main lines at Herne Hill, with all sorts of branches across the spaghetti that is South London's suburban railways. The first main branch goes down southwest via Wimbledon, taking over the Southern Loop route that is currently served rather infrequently by Thameslink. From here, one branch would continue all the way to Sutton, then the other would get on the main SWR line to Weybridge via Surbiton. There would be another short stop from Surbiton to Hampton Court. Back to Herne Hill, the second main branch would use the route today served by Southeastern, running via Beckenham Junction, which today has a tram connection. At Bickley, the line would again split into two, one to Orpington and one to Swanley. And there you go, the Victoria line, but Crossrail-ified. There would be lots of obvious benefits for a system like this. A bunch of lines that don't have the most frequent of service to this day would have been upgraded, perhaps even with stations expanded to accommodate longer trains that you'd like to have. This happened with the Thameslink program a couple decades ago to allow their 243-meter long 12-car trains to serve most platforms with all doors. Similarly, the Elizabeth line brought more frequent service on the line out to Shenfield, though to be fair, it was already a pretty solid 6 trains an hour before that. This line would also have gone to great lengths, quite literally, to address the north-south divide that exists on London's railways. Just one look at a tube map reveals that there's far more urban rail north of the Thames than there is to the south. There are a number of reasons for that, but today South London is quite a mess to navigate and cross by train. So many lines intersect and overlap to mean that frequencies in each individual segment can be quite limited, especially when you consider that there isn't much space at a termini like Victoria and Waterloo to turn trains. For example, the Southern Loop, as mentioned earlier in this video, only runs every half an hour at the moment, and as such some of the stations on the line are among the least used mainline train stations in all of London. It is kind of a chicken and egg situation. Are these stations very low used because the service isn't great? Or is the service not great because the stations don't have a lot of ridership potential? I think it's more likely the former because, frequent trains are gonna get people on them. It's just the general principle. The solution, of course, is through running onto railways in the north via that new central tunnel. Thameslink does accomplish this to an extent, with quite broad coverage of the south, but that network doesn't really serve central London as effectively as the Elizabeth line. Its tube connections are also quite weak, as despite serving the 6th-line St. Pancras, it does take quite some time to walk through the main station to reach the tube platform. Not to mention, the Thameslink junctions themselves are major bottlenecks, especially on approach into London Bridge and Elephant and Castle. This souped-up Victoria line would have been the best of both worlds, a north-to-south railway that not only travels through central London quicker than a traditional tube line, but also stops at places in central London that people want to go. I do think that it would be a tiny bit slower than the present-day Victoria line in central London though, largely because the acceleration wouldn't be quite as fast. The 2009 stock accelerates at a blazing 1.3 meters per second squared, something that even the high-performance Class 345 can't replicate. Compared to the present-day Victoria line, you would also lose direct access to King's Cross, St. Pancras, and Euston, which is a bit of a blow. But the present-day Victoria line, including the northern half up to Walthamstow, does still have a part to play in our story. I'll come on to that later, but first, we need to talk about parallel universes. Wait, cut the music. We're already in a parallel universe. This is alternate history. Anyway, we need to talk about a circle line and its Berlin equivalent, the ringbahn. The Berlin S-Bahn is the first example of such a system in the German-speaking world, but is also widely considered the best. A big part of that success is the orbital railway that a few services use. You can get trains that go all the way around the loop, in both directions, which are bizarrely given 2 different numbers. You can get trains from the suburbs that use a short section of the loop before going back out into other suburbs, as seen with the S8 in light green on this map. And you can even get trains that intersect the loop only to go into the city. That's because passing through the ringbahn are 2 lines meeting at Friedrichstrasse that allow you to cross it faster. This is useful if you're making a cross-regional trip but don't want to spend too much time going around in circles, probably requiring you to change trains at least twice too. It also complements the city's actual metro, the U-Bahn, very well. The subsurface lines in London don't really do this. There are services that briefly enter the loop, but in general the Circle line has its north half shared with the Metropolitan line and its south half shared with the District line, and most of the subsurface services are impacted by delays within the Circle. The south half in particular is really slow, taking 17 minutes to cover just 8 kilometers from South Kensington to Tower Hill, and sometimes it's even more, just because of how delay prone the junctions are. What if you could do it faster? Well, unlike the Victoria Line Crossrail proposal, something like this was once discussed. There were plans way back when to take a set of express tracks under the District Line, which would have terminated at Mansion House. That never materialized, but it seems like a fun idea to probe. What if the District line got express service at some point? And yes, I know the Piccadilly line exists today, which is kind of an express district line and was designed in that way to an extent, but we're talking the full district line, at least the bit share with the Circle line. I think instead of building the express tracks underneath the existing local tracks, I would have built a totally new line that serves some places a little bit off to the side, and reconnected with the main district at a select few stations with 4 tracks, enabling cross-platform transfers from the local to the express. It's very much like the New York subway. After Earl's Court, instead of serving either Gloucester Road or South Kensington, there's a new station at Exhibition Road that is kind of the average of both. It would certainly help ease overcrowding at South Ken, and as a regular commuter there, I am totally not biased. Then you would connect with the Piccadilly at Knightsbridge before heading back towards the main district at Victoria for a 4-platform local express connecting station. Next would be Charing Cross, much closer to actual Charing Cross station than Embankment. Then it's the aforementioned New Aldwych, kind of close to Temple, and then another 4-platform station at Blackfriars. Next is Bank instead of Monument, a new station right at Fenchurch Street, which would be connected to Aldgate as well, and finally one last 4-track station at Whitechapel. With this express line, there are now only 8 intermediate stops between Earl's Court and Whitechapel, rather than 14 on the local district line. I think if we're mapping onto today's services, I would say that all Richmond and some Wimbledon trains would use the express tracks, with all Ealing Broadway trains and the rest of the Wimbledon trains using the local line. At least the ones that don't go to Edgware Road. Ealing is far away, but it does have the Central line, which, while not necessarily an express district line, is a bit quicker for going from west to east, and there's a nice cross-platform transfer between them at Mile End. And of course there's now the Elizabeth line too, which is kind of like a faster Metropolitan line, but not really. I said the rest of the present-day Victoria line would come back, and now it's time to address that. In this alternate history, that line gets realized not as a new deep-level line, but as a branch off of the Circle line. Between King's Cross and Farringdon would be 2 pairs of tracks that leave the line and merge together at Angel, the existing Northern Line station, and from there would continue just as the present-day Victoria line does, with Highbury and Islington and Finsbury Park having cross-platform interchanges just as they do today. Next up, Seven Sisters, Tottenham Hale, Black Horse Road, and Walthamstow Central. But why stop there? Let's extend the line, because we are in an alternate history, so let's go crazy. Next up is a new station at Whipps Cross near a hospital, then 2 connections to the Central line at Snaresbrook and Newbury Park, with another new station at Clay Hall in between. The final stop would be Chadwell Heath, connecting to the Great Eastern Main Line and of course the present-day Elizabeth line. In theory, it could continue even further to Romford, and maybe take over the shuttle to Upminster too, but that's probably a little bit too much. This line would effectively replace what is today the Hammersmith and City line, but that name doesn't really make sense anymore, and it's also just not a great name. So I decided to come up with a new one. I went for the Finsbury line, or the Highbury line. That one also sounds cool, and also starts with H as well. Take your pick. I prefer the Finsbury line just a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that all these changes would have necessarily made the subsurface lines better, but it would have definitely provided interesting alternatives. The Express District line would undeniably speed up long trips on what is the slowest part of the tube, and the Finsbury line would be a great way to give North London high-capacity metro trains that run frequently and have plenty of onward connections if needed, including at Highbury and Islington, where you'd have a nice cross-platform transfer to the Crossrailified Victoria line. Crossrail 2 seems like an eternity away, so maybe in the meantime all we can do is imagine and draw some maps. And speaking of maps, here are some that I made for this project. So yeah, that is my entry to the Classy Wheel Alternate History contest. Thank you so much for watching. This idea was really fun to put together. I don't think it's perfect by any means, and I would not advocate for building it now, absolutely not. But it is still fun to imagine sometimes. And I think this sort of crayoning does give me a better understanding of what London's railways actually look like. So maybe I'll do it more often. See you around.